By the way, this is not a self-portrait. That's a friend of mine at the garage. And it just reminds me that the first thing I want to do is tell you a little story, because you've got to start with a story, especially at the end of the day like this. Just imagine for a moment that you are taking an 8-year-old boy to football practice. Maybe it's your boy, maybe your neighbour's son, and it's the most important thing for the week. For this little, here's Johnny, he's in the back seat right next to you, and you're going to football practice. You drive out your door, and you notice there's a noise under the bonnet of your car, one you hadn't heard before. You're a bit concerned about that. So you just go around the block to your normal garage and you stop, and here's the mechanic having a listen to that noise to say, well, actually, what's the problem? I don't want to drive this car without getting someone to have a quick listen. And it's okay, Johnny, we will get to football. This is just a quick stop to have the mechanic have a listen. And the mechanic says it's really not a problem. There's a little part, it's about that big, and there's a crack through it. And it's that crack rattling that you can hear. And we've got them in the spare parts shop. Well, I'll go and grab one. It takes 2 minutes to fit the new part, and you'll be on your way. So the mechanic goes away, and then he comes back, and he says, I'm really sorry, but we don't have that part in stock. I'm really, really sorry. We should have it. We normally do. We just haven't got it. I will come to your house. You just live around the corner. You're a regular customer here. I'll come to your house. I'll fit it for you completely for free tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We'll get one in first thing. And you say, okay. And then he drops the bombshell. In the meantime, don't drive your car. Because if the rest of that part breaks off, you could do some really serious engine damage. So just drive back around the block, take it home, park it up, and I'll be there 9 o'clock in the morning to fit that part, and you'll be all good to go. Now, here's the thing. You are driving away from the garage. You're going straight back home. Little Johnny, he's pretty annoyed. My question to you is, was that mechanic capable of fixing your car? Yes or no? Interesting question. Who goes for yes? Yeah, there's a few yeses. So it's not a trick question, honestly. Both answers are completely defensible. Who goes for yes? Yep. And somebody goes for no. There's a few saying no. Kind of a 50-50 mix. It's interesting. It's an interesting question, isn't it? What if I was to turn it, Johnny, was that mechanic chap capable of fixing our car? What would little Johnny say? Everybody sort of, he would say no, wouldn't he? Because he doesn't really care why the car isn't fixed. He just knows he's not going to football practice. So what's interesting about that is the fact, A, that half of you answered the question different to the other half. That's fascinating. And half of you answered it different to what little Johnny would have said. I've seen this happen in organizations. I've sat in a boardroom where people have got this confused. And I've had to say, time out, guys. Come on. There's something going on here. There's a big elephant in the room. And it's how we use that word capability. Now, I'm not trying to redefine what's in the dictionary here. But what I'm trying to point out is there's a lot of different ways you can think about that word. And people in your organization will be thinking about it differently to what you are and amongst themselves. So what I've noticed that's really interesting is when I'm talking to largely a business audience, managers, the operations people, they automatically say, well, no, not capable, period. I just don't care, the car's still broken. We're driving a broken car. Of course, that garage was not. And they talk about the garage being not capable rather than the mechanic. In other words, they were not served by the people they were asking to serve them. L&D people often will say, yes, he was capable. Oh, but you didn't have the spare part. Or we don't know. Or there's this kind of almost like soft, Weasley way of looking at it. Sorry, but that's kind of what it comes across to a business person. I think what's going on is that L&D people often are answering a slightly different question. Those of you who answered yes, I suspect were answering in your mind the question, was he competent? Not was he capable. That's interesting. Competence is different to capability. Now, I find that Now, what's interesting is that those two words are often used interchangeably. Capability's gotten messed up with this dismissal thing that the HR people use around capability. There's all sorts of different meanings out there for it. So as I said, I'm not trying to redefine what should be in the Oxford Dictionary. I'm just saying, be aware that there's different definitions out there. As I said, I've sat in a boardroom and listened to the operations people talk to the L&D people, and I've had to say, time out. Time out, time out. Do you guys realize there's this huge elephant in the room and no one can even see it, let alone know it's there? Not like you're ignoring it, you just don't even know it's there. And this is this different definition of capability and competence. So just for now, bear with me, the way that we'll define capability is, can the person do the job in front of them? At the point of work, where it matters. Because that's where it matters. It's not sometime beforehand in a training room or in a quiz or a test. Actually, we know that Manic's competent, the mechanic. He looked very competent, didn't he, when he's up on the picture? Anybody with a bum like that's got to be competent. So, when you're incapable, it's a little New Zealand cartoonist, it's great. I've had that expression on my face from time to time, and it's not always in those circumstances, I'd be glad to say. So we'll come back to this slide a couple of times during this presentation. So if you're talking about performance at the top, inevitably you are talking about, is the person capable of doing what needs to be done at the point of work when you ask them to do it? Whenever there's anything wrong with performance, underneath that there's going to be people who are not in the moment being able to do what you're asking them to do, for whatever reason. By the way, we've got a handout later, we'll give you this on the handout. Now, feeding into that, there are two primary areas. There's what the performer brings to this job in front of them, and what the environment subjects that performer to when they are trying to do the job in that environment. Two simple areas. And the performer brings these things on the left-hand side, and you might say those are the things that make up the competence of a performer. The environment has a whole lot of other stuff around that performer that will impact and affect how well, or perhaps not well, they're able to do that job that's in front of them. So what I'm going to do is just look at these to define a few of these. You could treat that slide like it's a recipe for performance. But the neat thing about a recipe is that if you know what the ingredients are supposed to be, you can change them, you can move them, you can fix them. And one of the problems we have with performance is it's such a big thing. It's difficult to know where to intervene when you've got this big thing called performance that somehow isn't happening and we want it to happen in a certain way. See, we talk about performance management in a very glib sense, and what most organizations that I talk with mean by that, and actually most management training courses, is what we'll do when we manage performance is we'll measure people. We'll find out when they're not doing what we want them to do, and then we have some options. We will focus on the person who's not doing what we want them to do, and we will send them off to learning and development so they can get pixie dust sprinkled on them and they'll be fixed. Or we'll get out a much bigger stick or a much bigger carrot, or we'll move them sideways to some place they might be able to do it, or we'll just move them out altogether. We'll free up their future. So this is kind of how performance management often works. There's a focus on the performer, and people forget that every performer is operating on a stage on which they are performing. And we forget about the stage. We focus on the performer and we say for some reason that performer is a bit broken. Now, that can be a bit seductive at times, because what you might say, we've got this job here and Sally can do it, but John can't. So therefore John must be deficient in some way because he can't do that job that Sally can do. This is seductive because it starts you thinking that you've got to fix John. What's actually can be happening, not always, but can be, is Sally's been in the business a long time. She knows how to get around the corners, how to duck and dive, her experience has helped her understand how to get around the barriers in the environment that's stopping lesser mortals doing the job. So we've got some options. We can either train all those lesser mortals like John up to Sally's sort of guru expertise level, or we can just fix the things that's stopping people like John and all his colleagues. It's a fairly expensive proposition trying to train everybody up to Sally's level of expertise. It'd be very nice to have it, but boy, is that an expensive way to go about fixing a problem when the problem's in the environment. If you fix the environment, actually, John and all his colleagues at that level can then work and do that job effectively. So that's interesting. But what actually happens is that people come to L&D. Usually, that's one of the first steps. And in effect, what they're saying is, I've got these broken people, here they are, can you please fix them? Have you had that? And by the way, the way to fix them is a 2-day training course on, you name your thing. Empathy, management, leadership. Yeah, we want leaders. They'll come flying in with billowing capes and shiny underpants and they'll fix the world's problems. But see, a leadership course, well, maybe, but if you don't enable the followers, then actually your leadership course is kind of wasted. One of the metaphors I sometimes use is if you've got someone who's doing a job and they're in the middle of their job, and in order to do the job, they have to move around a bit. But the problem is, the floor is covered with broken glass because of all these barriers in the environment, these things that get in the way of them doing what they want to do. And in order for me to want to walk over that broken glass, I'm going to have such a high grade of leadership pulling me to want to do that. So why would I bother? And yet so many people put leadership programs in place and they fail to try and enable their followers. They leave all the broken glass on the floor. Now, if you can do a leadership program that's going to create leaders in your organization that are as good as Gandhi or Mandela, you go for it. And you can leave the broken glass on the floor if you want, and it'll work. But that's not easy, and again, it's not cheap. So sweep up the broken glass. Different way to look at it. Sorry, I get a bit sort of... And now, once you've got the broken glass swept up, by all means do your leadership programs, and they will really fly. But if you're trying to get people to follow across broken glass, and that's where we're coming back to, is the environment around someone has a massive impact on their ability to do the job that you're asking them to do. But let's come back to this needs and want thing. What they come to do is they come to you and they say, what I want is these training courses. What they need might be something different. What they need might be a broom to sweep up the glass. Because people want what they want. And actually the operations people have been taught, unfortunately over the years by learning and development, that we as L&D people have a solution to your performance problem, and what we do typically is we train people. I know there's more to it than that, I'm kind of oversimplifying. But very often that's what's there. And you get this request. The best one I ever heard, by the way, was a 3-day course on empathy training. That was in a big bank I was doing some work with. That was scary. And they did the training. The training was developed, it was delivered, and I said, how did that work? And the lady said, training was good. And I said, I bet you did a really good training. 3 days for empathy, that's got to be. And I said, but what did the business think? I said, oh, they didn't think much of it. It didn't work. And I said, yeah, well, of course it didn't work, because it was never a training issue in the first place. There was something else going on. So what you'll often find is the business will try and ask you for what they want, and it's not what they need. Does that make, you see this difference? And if someone just gets what they need, what they actually need is capability at the point of work. But what they want is some way to gather that, to get it. So you have to have a better discussion with them around what they really need. And that's part of what we're sort of looking into. Focus on what people do. Because that's what they want. They want people doing things. They want people performing. So it's focusing on need. And so part of your job as an L&D practitioner, in my opinion, is to help make visible to the people who are asking for what they want, make visible to them what they really need. And then they'll say, I need that. Oh, now you've shown me what that is. I need that. I need a broom for this broken glass, for example. And that might go in conjunction with a training course and all the rest of it. It's never simple. There's always a complex solution in there, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. But that's part of your role, I think, is to help differentiate between need and want for these people. Okay, so let's come back to that slide. There's all sorts of things going on in there, but this is a recipe. And you've got to look at the different bits of the recipe. Now, performance is a big, massive concept. And what we do as human beings is we say, we've got this big thing that we really can't get our little tiny human minds around, so what we will do is we'll split it into pieces. We'll divide it up so that we can look at different pieces and decide what we're going to do with those different pieces. And then we call that a model. So this is kind of like a model. And by the way, any model by definition is not true, because what you've done is you've taken bits out of what we might call reality until you've got a small enough piece left that we can understand. But a model can be useful. And this is a really useful model. So if you look through at what's there. Now, if the model doesn't work, the recipe doesn't work. I've been reliably informed that's not a good cake. Actually, I quite like that gooey stuff in the middle, don't you? I remember as a kid licking it out of the bowl when my mother was cooking. It's the best part of the cake before it's cooked, isn't it? Anyways, so that's what we got. So I've got a couple of little stories to tell. On the left-hand side of that, there was a number of things about the competence of somebody, the things that make someone competent in the way we've defined competence here, what the person brings to the equation. The first one was knowledge. I've got to put a little Kiwi picture. This is a New Zealand accent, or what's left of it anyway, so I had to put a Kiwi picture in there. It's a beautiful country, isn't it? First time I was here in the UK, I was driving in London. I'd rented a car, and I was in a street in the evening and flashing blue lights, and I thought, oh my God, what's happened here? And they pulled me over. Now, thankfully, they weren't wearing guns. Other places I'd been, they wear guns, and I thought, okay, I'm at least reasonably safe here. And they said, you're driving down a one-way street the wrong way. And I said, really? Sorry, I didn't know. In my even stronger Kiwi accent as it was back then, this is a long time back, 1984, I think I was first in this country. And they said, yeah, you can see straight back where you came from, there's a no entry sign. Can you see it? Didn't you notice it? And I said, no. He said, it's the red one. You know the one I mean, the round one with what has he got in the middle, a white line? And I said, that's a no entry sign, really? I didn't realize that. I didn't get a ticket, by the way. My accent was still pretty solid then. And I said, we have no entry signs in New Zealand, but they're round, but they got no entry written on them. Because we can read in New Zealand, you know. But, so you need to know the road signs to drive. There's knowledge you've got to have to do a task that you've got to have internalized and able to bring back when you need it. That's what I mean by knowledge. I used to work in a restaurant, not as fancy as that, and I never wore red braces, but there was various things that we had to do that took skill, things we had to practice. And so this is just to remind us there are skills that we need that require practice in order to get competent at something. The other thing on that list was attitude. What attitude do I bring to the table? What mindset, what motivation in the moment do I bring to that job? And that matters in terms of whether I'm going to be bothered to do that job. This guy, by the way, I'm not talking about engagement here. Engagement's a different thing. They're very closely correlated. I'm talking here about the sort of transient motivation that goes on a day-to-day, even hour-by-hour basis. If you get an email that actually just says, that project you did all that work on has now been canned, motivation, not good. An email comes in saying that, you know, it's just been accepted, your big proposal, and you think, yes, that's great. But underneath that, your engagement with that company is unlikely to change very much. Now, if that happens on a regular basis, your engagement might sink or it might rise. But the engagement is a much slower burning, slower changing thing underneath the day-to-day transient motivation. And it's that transient stuff that affects your competence in the moment to do a job at the point of work. Did you get that differential, that distinction? That's really important. I put that in there because the fourth on that list I said was physiology. At a physiological level, what am I bringing to that job? And that matters. I used to drive a fork truck in some commercial freezers, ice cream factory. It's good fun. Driving fork trucks on ice was really good fun. That's not obviously not in a freezer, because we were all dressed up in 3 balaclavas. It was minus 20 degrees. And you only had to spend an hour or so, and then you had to go out and into the warm-up room and so on. But 2 of the fork trucks on the fleet that we were driving had quite low safety cages. I'm kind of tall, and I couldn't fit in those. So physiologically, I was incapable of doing a full shift in one of those trucks. That's what I mean by physiology. There's something that stops you from doing the job. It might be because of physical size, fitness. It might be because I just don't have the manual dexterity to be a jeweler. I don't have the intellectual horsepower to do actuarial mathematician stuff or something like that. So those are the things on the left that make up what I would term competence for the individual in terms of reference to that job. So the individual, you can say, over here, outside, you can talk about an individual's competence. But I personally don't think you can talk about their capability separated from the job you're trying to get them to do. To talk about capability, you must talk about the job as well, and therefore the environment in which they're doing it. Does that make sense? At least in the way we've defined it here. Now, if you go back to work, you might find they're using capability in a completely different way. That's okay. Just be aware there's these subtle differences and how that might be interpreted when you're talking with the business. And be aware that by and large, operations and business people will think about capability in the rather black and white way we've talked about it here. Can the person do the job? And that has a much bigger, and capability covers all this stuff. On the right-hand side, I won't go through and belabor, we just don't have time here. But these are all the things that you might find in the environment. EPS, by the way, is electronic performance support. So what systems are available? What can they call on in the moment? How big are the barriers between them and the information on the intranet they might need access to? How big are the barriers between them and colleagues? How big are the barriers between them and a social network they need to get onto to ask questions from, and things like that. So there's all sorts of stuff, and tools, resources, parts. There's so much. Even, just think back for a minute over the last couple of weeks. How many times have you been unable to do a job that you had on your desk you wanted to get done? No need to put your hands up. But of those times, what proportion of them was due to you not knowing what to do, and what proportion of them was due to something in your environment stopping you doing it? Like a train was late, your laptop broke down, the broadband busted, something, you didn't have the right file, a colleague didn't do their bit, the system or process didn't let you do it because the sign-off you wanted, the person was not in today. There's so many things that stop people in their tracks when they're trying to do stuff. That's the broken glass on the floor. That's often where you need to look first. So very quickly, here's how you get to the bottom of the recipe. You've come across the fishbone diagram. Yep, a lot of you nodding. The standard Ishikawa cause effect diagram. So what you can do is run this. By the way, this is all, if you want, I've got a book out on this whole process. So, and all at a detail level on how L&D can have that conversation with the business. And it takes you through this process. And so what you're doing with this is if you go through this process with an operational manager who wants some training, you can use this process to help make visible to them what they really need. So you're just facilitating them through it. So you're not challenging them saying, no, you don't want training, you're silly, because that's just creating more conflict. And they'll dig their toes in and say, no, I really want this training. And they'll jump up and down, because managers do that. So run this process, and run it twice. The first time you run it, you can use those 4 things on the ribs on the fish. I won't go into how to use this diagram. There's plenty of stuff on the web on how to do it when we literally don't have time right now. But the effect you're investigating is someone who's not capable of doing the job in front of them. Then you can run the fish a second time. So you've got 2 fish. This is a 2-fish problem. And you can put different things around the environment that are affecting the capability of that person at the point of work. And out of that, in effect, what you're doing is you're diagnosing what's happening in the system of performance. And it'll start giving you a handle on the levers you can pull that will change what's happening in the system that will give you better performance. It's all about knowing what levers to pull. Now, often what you'll find is there's different levers you can pull, but the cost of ownership of that lever will be more. So yes, you could train everybody, all the Johns in your organization, to be as skilled as Sally. Yes, you can make that call, but that's going to be an expensive lever to pull. It might work, it might not, but it's an expensive lever. There's other things you can do, like make sure, well, the mechanic story. I mean, if we did this on there, you might find, well, the spare part's missing because the stock reordering levels were set wrong in the computer. Okay, why was that? So you keep asking why. Why were they wrong? Oh, the guy put the wrong value in. Okay, why did he put the wrong value in? Oh, because he hadn't read the manual, or he hadn't had the training, or whatever it was. So it might be a training issue, but it's the spare parts manager training, not the mechanics. But too often what we do is we say the mechanic's not doing the job, and we're getting other complaints, so let's send these mechanics off on a customer service course. That's not going to work. But that's all too frequently what happens. Okay, so if we look at this like it is a performance consultancy level, we start looking at root causes and barriers, and then we're going to get solutions that work because you're pulling levers that will make a difference. That's the subtle difference that we're talking about here. So really your role is very much around capability. Actually, for an L&D person, your role really is about helping others manage capability. So you're more like a performance consultant doing that. So just to finish up, I've got just a couple of brief ideas which are kind of fun. There's a pin in the map there. It's somewhere in Illinois. It's a little town actually called Bloomington, and there's a suburb there called Normal. As far as I'm aware, it's the only place in the world that's really normal. But as you leave there, as you drive out, this is what you see. It's true. That's a real picture from outside Normal. Now, what I'm saying is things are changing. That's in your rearview mirror. So you can't just keep doing that old training paradigm. And by the way, I'm not anti-training. I think training is a wonderful intervention when used in the right place for the right purpose. And it's actually proven that it's the right intervention against that sort of map of capability that we looked at. So in a sense, this is a bit of a wake-up call. It's a fun slide, and I have no idea why the penguin's carrying a handbag, so don't ask. I found this on the internet, and it just looked kind of cute. Someone told me once that's got to be a first aid kit, because her husband's going to need it when he hits those symbols together. Okay. So that's kind of me done. We have a stand 609 just up on the side here if you want to come and say hello. That would be great. The 2 books I've written, so there's a lot of stuff that we're there. We've got a couple of software products. Please feel free to get in touch. But I've got a present for you before you go anywhere. On your seat there would have been a little voucher for you to fill in. And in return for that, I've got a lovely bag. It's a very nice bag, and it's full of some stuff that I think might be very useful to you. They never really give me a table here. I won't go these through in order. There's a little tips booklet I wrote on things that are useful to L&D people. Okay? We've already had a reprint of this. A lot of people say, that's brilliant. That's really helped me refocus on what's important in L&D. So that's something I wrote. In the bag, there's a copy of that primary slide with the performance mapping stuff that I had on there. So that's there. We also have 3 different best practice guides that I wrote. One of them, well, if you're here and you're looking for systems, this one is very valuable. This is about system selection. So that's in there. This one here is number 5, is about how to get new managers started in a slightly different way. So those of you who are thinking, well, how do I get a new manager up and running effectively? Here's a way to do it. By the way, it doesn't require any software. It's just a different philosophy of how to do it. If you've got lots of managers, it's useful to have a platform to do it with, and we can provide that. But obviously this is a nice way to think about getting managers going, but based on experiential learning for that management rather than putting them in a training room for a week and expecting them to remember it all. Another one is this one, which covers some of the stuff we've done on the talk today. And so there's a fishbone diagram and things in that. So that gives you how that's working. The other bits that we've got is I'm very happy to have a chat with you on the phone. So if anybody just wants to talk about L&D stuff and have a good old L&D natter, I'm very happy to do that. So you can tick that box on there. And also we've got an online performance support tool. We'll throw in a month's access to that for free. Oh, by the way, that's also available for free for Learning at Work Week next week. So if any of you got a Teams or people and you want that, just let us know and we'll send you a link so you can get it out to your organization for Learning at Work Week, which is next week. And you get a really good looking bag. It's a good looking bag. Here it is. See, it's got all the stuff on it. So fill in your voucher, claim your goodie bag. There's people at the back there and they'll scan your badge and give you a pre-packed bag with all the stuff in it. And we're done. It's 4:30. So have a really good, safe journey home, and we're just up the side corridor if you want to come and say hello. Brilliant. Thank you.